Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We are waiting another 2 or 3 minutes before getting started as people are coming online. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you so much for your patience. We really look forward to talking about ending hate in education this evening.
And just until we start, just so everybody knows, you do have the option to type in, if you go into the webinar chat, if there's anything. I see that someone, I don't know if uh, it's meant to be or not, but someone has their hands raised. So if there's something that you'd like to raise, by all means, or if you're having an issue jumping on or hearing, let us know.
I think we can get started and more people will come in. And of course, the video will be available and circulated afterwards as well. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Gerard Filitti. I'm an attorney and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project, where all we do is fight anti-Semitism through strategic legal action and through grassroots activism in partnership with the End Jew Hatred movement, which started as a project of the Lawfare Project. I'm joined this evening by Michelle Ahdoot, our amazing director of strategy and programming. Everyone here who probably has received text messages or calls from her over the years, and she is really indefatigable in the fight, being there in person and making sure that our voices are heard. We have Alexandra Smith, our Canada Director for End Jew Hatred, who is somehow managing to do in one entire country what a lot of people are trying to do in the United States. So thank you, Alexandra, for bringing our presence to Canada, which really desperately needs attention right now. Adar Rubin, our Director of Mobilization, his energy and passion for bringing people together from different groups, different faiths, different organizations, in order to actually get meaningful change is crucial to the success of any action. Activism means that we all fight under the banner to end Jew hatred, no matter what organization we're with or where we live. Chloé Davis is the development director at the Lawfare Project, and believe it or not, she is an incredible activist and leads activism in Connecticut and elsewhere. Without her vibrant and dynamic energy, we would not be able to be putting on programs like this. And you do not see, but behind the scenes, we have Larkin Brown, our team member who is instrumental to helping everyone get everything done. And I don't know how she does it. I wish I had her energy and her passion, but we are all immensely grateful for her support and for everything that she brings to the table. Hope to see you in other events soon. Our topic for this evening, thank you, Larkin. Hi. Our topic for this evening is ending hate in education. We all know what the problem is. Unfortunately, we see it all too often on college campuses. We see the rhetoric, we see the indoctrination, we see the extremism, the radicalism that's causing harm to our students. On college campuses, there's been a lot of groups that have fought. Lawfare Project has filed and is currently litigating cases. Other organizations are as well. It's not to say that things are so much better today than there were 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, or even 10 years ago. But on college campuses, at least there seems to be the understanding in the Jewish community and among our allies that Jew hatred is a problem and there is interest in addressing it. K-12, different beast. The real issue is by the time kids get to college, they've already been radicalized. They've already been indoctrinated. This starts in our elementary schools. This progresses through middle schools and high schools. This is the gradual indoctrination into the idea that Jewish identity is being defined by other people, not by us. That the idea that Jews are not indigenous to our homeland in Israel or anywhere in the Middle East for that matter. The idea that it's acceptable to demand social justice for other minority groups, but to deny that Jews are a minority group entitled to civil rights protections under the law. And the problem is that it's much more nefarious in K-12 because it's much less transparent. We don't have students who speak out about it nearly as much as they do on college campuses. A lot of parents are not aware of what's going on in the classroom. And even when you see news articles about things that are happening in schools, many parents don't know where to turn, what the next step is, how to do something to bring about change, where to even start. So End Jew Hatred helped put together a toolkit for parents. Now, we're not going to claim, and we do not claim, that we know how to solve the problem or that we are the organization to go to, because we're not an organization. We're a movement, which means that we work with a lot of organizations. Michelle will be telling you more about them. So we are helping bring people together, and we are helping get people information in order to take the next step to help their community and their kids. And there are a lot of good organizations out there that can really get into the weeds, whether the issue is with a policy, with a lesson plan, with curriculum, with a particular teacher, with a board. Once we know what the problem is and we help you identify that problem, there's so many groups that we work with that you can turn to for more specific guidance and help, whether it's implementing a new type of lesson plan for a classroom, or introducing a curriculum, or giving teaching materials to teachers and to faculty that are fair and balanced and present Jewish identity in the right way. These are things that we as a community need to pool our resources and do together. And over the last year, we've behind the scenes worked with a lot of organizations to come together and have these connections so we know who's out there in the field and who can help. And for this evening, our goal is more than anything to let you know what tools are available for you to help identify what's going on in the classroom, the curriculum, the lesson plans, how to obtain these things, how to know what's going on at the Board of Ed. And we'll get to that a little bit later, but I have to say the biggest and most important thing is parental involvement. Finding the time to ask your kids what they're learning in class. Not just, hey, how was your day? But what did your history teacher talk about? What did your language arts teacher talk about? What are they showing you in class? That's key to understanding the process by which indoctrination or radicalization is working its way into the classroom. And beyond asking your kids and talking to them, it's going to school board meetings, seeing what's on the agenda, participating and asking questions and making comments during public comment periods so that the community understands that we're loud, we're proud, we're aware of what's going on, and we are involved, that these are issues we care about. Because what's that, the Washington Post, democracy dies in the darkness? Well, our freedoms die when we are not alert to what's going on in school board meetings. That's where they vote to adopt curriculums that might be harmful to us. That's where they vote to hire people who may hate us. This is why we need to know what's going on at school boards and how to be an active participant in that process.
Perfectly said, Gerard. So I'm going to jump in now, everybody. Hi. And, Gerard he really put it all out there and said it beautifully. One interesting piece is that this is the End Hate in Education initiative. You'll note that it's not specifically End Jew Hatred, because we're really on this front to fight the anti-democratic values, to fight radical Islamism and radical values in general and ideologies. So, as Gerard perfectly said, we are an umbrella movement. So what this initiative is, it's really the thought that the need to unite across the United States, unite across Canada, bring together all of the people, the grassroots activists, the org leaders, directors that are experts in all of the different facets of K-12 education come together so that we could help you, the parents, and if there are educators on here, be the activists that we need you all to be. So, as Gerard mentioned, for the past now, it's over a year, we've been meeting with possibly some of you on this call, but putting calls out to these activists and leaders to pick your brains, to figure out, A, best practices, B, where you're located, so that we really have put together a cross section from East Coast to West Coast, from bigger orgs to smaller orgs, of partners in education and partners in this, so that when time comes, if we're telling you and tasking you with, hey, be a parent activist, go find out what your child's curriculum is. Once we have these curricula in front of us, we can then really team up with the partner orgs that are really the experts at delving into specific aspects to ensure that this, indoctrination is not occurring. So, over the past year, anywhere from Navi to Camera to Stand With Us K-12. Then we have from West Coast, East Coast Peer K-12, NYCPS. I mean, I could go on and on. Parents Against Anti-Semitism, CJA, and everywhere in between. Point is that there are so many amazing orgs doing amazing things. So those of you that know me and know us, we work a lot on WhatsApp with action items and groups. So we've even put together, for instance, it's called a K-12 general chat. Again, it's an End Jew Hatred K-12 general chat, but we're not the leaders of this. Just to see the intelligence and the leaders in that chat, from Brandy Shupatinsky to Naya Lecht and so many more, and the information sharing and help that one can give another when news is shared, et cetera, is incredible. So what we've done, we've now put together both, a website initiative landing page, along with an activist toolkit, which in large part is based off of everything that we've learned from so many of you. And again, guys, everything is fluid, but the goal is to really enable you to be an activist. It's sort of like activism 101 in the K-12 area to ensure that indoctrination doesn't occur. And I can't stress enough that it's the unity piece and really counting on and using our amazing partner leaders to really ensure that everybody stays in their lane of expertise, and we're just bringing everybody together, to really work towards a better tomorrow. So I don't know, Gerard, if we could maybe bring up the actual End Hate in Education page now, and it might be really helpful to walk everybody through it. Just so they see, as you had mentioned, the Board of Ed curriculum, et cetera, what the different, pieces of this puzzle are, and how we're trying to really make everything, as easy as it can be for people to be activists.
Good idea. Thank you for pulling it up, Larkin. Before going through the page, I just have to point out that the guidebook, the discussion on activism is not just what you're doing to ask for information and to talk to teachers or to board members. It's also on two other levels. One of them is legal. One of them is the addressing actual wrongs that are actionable in a courtroom, and that is something that the Lawfare Project and, quite frankly, other organizations can do to help. So these are also resources available to you when you are being discriminated, when your kids are targeted with discrimination. It's not always a matter of, okay, we need to ask for changing a lesson plan. Sometimes we need to impose consequences through legal channels, and that is where the legal arm of this comes in. But there is also one other thing which we will talk about a little later. It's not just what you can do in your school, it's what you can do in the electoral process. And whether it's running for school board and being part of the system, or asking for change at a state level. And I'll give you one example that I think applies everywhere across the country, whether it's ethnic studies in California, or whether it's the curriculums that are being pushed in New York City by nefarious organizations that present them to teachers as a way to help their students. There needs to be transparency. There is no reason why in 2025, after the pandemic, lesson plans, curriculums, all of this information, teaching materials cannot be placed online and be accessible to parents and community members. There's no excuse. COVID showed us that we can teach online and put lesson plans online, but we need transparency laws. We need states and we need activists to push those states. We need parents to demand laws be passed allowing precisely for that transparency, so that anyone can go online, click on a link and see exactly the materials that your kids are using in class. Because often it's not just the curriculum. Curriculum is a big picture item. It doesn't always go into the nitty-gritty of how specifically something is taught. For example, you want to learn, schools require in many states teaching about the Holocaust. But for all we know, you can teach about the Holocaust, that this is something that happened once in time. It was a mistake. And now let's talk about the Holocaust that the Jews are committing against Gazans. That's actually acceptable in some states. And that's not something you find by looking at a curriculum. That's something that you find out by looking at specific lesson plans and classroom materials. And there's no reason this information cannot be online and publicly available. Before the pandemic, the unions used to push back, saying it creates too much work. It creates cost for teachers or school districts to do this. But as we learned in the pandemic, no, it doesn't. You're even able to do it more effectively and efficiently today than ever. So that's not an excuse, not a justification. And it's really winnable because it's not just a Jewish issue. Parents want to know. Parents should be entitled to know exactly what their kids are learning. And who's going to oppose transparency laws? So this is something that could be tangible. This is something that we can win when we push for disclosure laws. Similarly, there are a lot of companies and individuals that sell or offer for free lesson plans. So when a teacher wants to teach her kids, for example, about Martin Luther King Day, and they don't have any experience on this, they can go and find, or they are approached by people who give them lesson plans. The problem is, I'm hard pressed to name a state where these companies or individuals that write the lesson plans are actually required to be certified or knowledgeable or licensed or publicly disclosed. Half the time, we don't know what the qualifications of these people are. We don't know who owns the company that is pushing these materials. And again, there's no reason for there to be this lack of transparency. There should be laws that require certification. There should be laws that require public disclosure. And this is the other part of the activist front, not just in your classroom, but in the community, pushing your Board of Education to have these transparency policies, pushing your legislature with Adar's help to have these laws enacted. This is a crucial long-term strategy that gives us the transparency we need to fight the nefarious information that's coming into our classrooms. But going back to the website is structured with, largely speaking, a guidebook to K-12 activism. This is something that you can click through and see online, or this is something that you can download. And I encourage people to actually download it, either the Canadian or the American version, so they have this as a resource, so they have it on their computer. We're also in the process of printing out versions of this so that parents can have it with all their other school materials and see how things are done. And when you look at the guidebook, it's presented in two general categories: how to get informed and how to take action. The first chapter, for example, is about how to obtain and review curriculum. And as you see on your screens, as a parent, you have the right in America under federal law to see and review the materials your child's public school uses in class. You don't need to give a reason. You don't have to explain why, although this might make it easier and quicker to gain access. You have a legal right to the curriculum. And while some schools, many schools actually make it easy and do publish this online, some don't, and you have to go through a process to get this, which is detailed in this chapter. And that's both for America and for Canada, which Alexandra can speak about.
Thank you. That was brilliant. So the main difference to note between the US and Canada for this chapter is that federal law mostly applies in this chapter for the US. In Canada, we have provincial laws that guarantee access to curriculum documents and instructional materials without justification. Which means that it gives the parent the right to request this. The curriculum documents you want are publicly posted online by ministries in each province or territory. So parents have the right to request textbooks, resources. Parents can consult and also work towards building things into policy, which we'll get into later. But parent consultation requirements vary significantly by province to province. However, it is important and integral that you are consistent in building this relationship, and that it's not just when there seems to be a red flag. Follow through and consistency. Get the teachers and board members to know your face, know who you are. And when you're requesting these materials, have the conversations with kids and other parents by getting involved in the parent council as well.
And these chapters also have in them, what to look for when you do get these curriculums, what to do if your request is denied. And I'll give you one example. For example, Michelle looked at the curriculum for history class, or 10th grade history in her school system. This was not difficult to find online. She didn't have to go to the school or email anyone or fill out a form. She could just look at it online. And in looking at the curriculum, you don't need to be an expert on everything, but it's kind of common sense. You see that there is a requirement, for example, in different places that students learn about nationalism in the Middle East. So already alarm bells should be should be ringing. Nationalism in the Middle East actually includes the birth of the state of Israel, and more likely than not, something about Palestinian identity. So that particular module is what we need to be looking more into. How is that taught? We know it's on the curriculum, so we know that more likely than not, these kids are getting some educational information about Israel and Palestine. And the next step is figuring out what that material actually is. And for that, there's chapter 2, which addresses how to obtain and review lesson plans. Now, that is a little more complicated because there is not the same broad automatic legal right to review lesson plans. They are more detailed than curriculum. They're basically the daily teaching materials. And access to this varies by state. Some states view them as public records. Parents' bills of rights laws in states like Florida and Texas enhance access. Other states, they will treat these as teacher work product and not disclose them. But regardless, the point is to ask. You want to see what teaching plan materials are being used. And even if you don't have that formal legal right guaranteed by state law, ask your kid's teacher or ask the teacher that's teaching the class, hey, what materials are you using? And you have to be worried, because if teachers are really refusing to discuss with a parent the lesson plans or what materials they're using to teach, again, that sets off alarm bells. Now, in the context of Michelle's the curriculum that's being used in that 10th grade history class, it's not yet clear. That's something that is a phone call to or an email to the teacher. But in looking at the state requirement and going a little bit on Google, we see that the materials that are being used in some schools to teach about nationalism are the type of materials that basically say Israel was a state that was invented as a condolence prize to the Jews for what happened during the Holocaust, and it completely omits any mention to Jewish indigeneity or history in our ancestral homeland before 1945. So that's the type of red flag. That's something that then you can take in the next step to take that to the school, to take that to the school board, to make that complaint that this information is really misinformation and it's biased and it's detracting from giving students a fair and accurate education because of that bias. But the first step is figuring out what's being taught. And that's chapter 1 and chapter 2, getting that curriculum and getting that lesson plan. And later towards the end, the call to action tonight, among others, is that every parent, every member of the community should go and see what's being taught in their social studies and history classes. Yes, there are more courses that are problematic, but these are usually where we see the biggest problem in social studies and history, obviously, because these are classes that explicitly will, at some point in your kid's education, address the Middle East and Israel and Europe and Jewish identity. So this is what we want to know. We want to know what's being taught as specifically as possible.
And so in Canada, like Gerard was saying, it is much the same that Canadian parents do not have a general broad access to individual lesson plans. You may request them from the teacher. However, the next step in obtaining those individual lesson plans would be made by a request via an MFI-PPA, which the document does go into detail explaining what this process is. And the documents for the steps, you're going to check your local policy. You will submit a written request under an FOI. You're going to clarify the scope, specify format according to the local rules and legislation, and you'll expect a response within 30 days. The emphasis in Canada is on transparency, and that's when you have to escalate to get that information using an FOI for the school board or board records. And that, again, is going to be the same. That is a process that can be used in both the US and in Canada.
The lesson materials are part of it, but one issue that we're seeing frequently in K to 12 are the enforcement of policies. And when we do have problems, unfortunately, come up, whether it's student on student or faculty on student or outside speakers, we see, unfortunately, that policies are not being enforced equally or at all. They're not being used to impose consequences on acts of Jew hatred, and this is furthering the problem. And part of the process of filing a complaint and being able to pursue a right requires understanding what those policies are. So in Chapter 3, under federal law in the United States, any school that gets federal funding, basically, which is pretty much all of them, so all public schools for that matter, are required to have written policies on how complaints and disciplinary matters are handled, whether involving students or teachers. They have procedures that need to detail how concerns are raised, how they're investigated, and how they're addressed. These policies are things that you are entitled to have access to. And it's key to look at these policies because following these policies is crucial to setting up a proper complaint. For example, if the policy says that when you have an issue with your teacher, you are complaining to, you file a written complaint using a school-based forum to the vice principal, then that's what you need to do. Sending an email to that teacher or the department head or the principal is not the same thing. In a courtroom, you might be able to argue constructive knowledge, but for all intents and purposes, you want to be following the complaint procedures. Because when you follow those complaint procedures, it makes it much more difficult for the school to not follow proper investigative techniques or to handle this properly. They can be called out for that by the state and in a courtroom, in a potential lawsuit. So the key here is understanding what the process actually is and following it, because all too often we have parents who, they've made a complaint to a teacher or the teacher or someone they know at school, or even a member of the Board of Ed. They've raised it verbally or in writing, but that's not actually what the complaint procedure is. And just as in colleges, when students don't complain in the right manner that's required by the rules, by the policy of the school, you can't really enforce the law that says that schools are required to act, for example, Title VI protections, if you're not actually following the complaint process. So it's crucial to understand what the processes are. Again, most schools that I've looked at have this somewhere on the website of the Board of Ed, of the school district, or of the school itself, at least in the United States.
Right. And Gerard, I'm just going to jump in here because it's interesting you bring this up. Many of you that are in our End Jew Hatred Action Items group see the work that our incredible activist writing group is churning out many times around K-12. So we have these researchers that are doing, true research on, a school issue, whether it's I'm sure all of you saw students forming a swastika on the football field or the baseball field that, a Jewish student flying overhead saw, things like that. So we have these activist writers that are doing a broad letter campaign to the district, to the school, getting word out to, even elected officials and all the Board of Ed trustees. But at the same time, we're working with parents in that school who ensure that they're following the procedural, steps that should be taken because they're parents of the school. And that's a very nice 1-2 punch. So I think, Gerard, what you brought up is super important because we're here to help all of you if there's a school issue we can do the broad campaign, but at the same time, it's extremely important on the micro level, you as a parent in that school to ensure that you're following the procedure. So I just wanted to chime in and say that, Gerard.
No, that's an excellent point. And going back to chapter 3 and 2 a little bit for Canada, in those disciplinary procedures and review of complaints. So for us, those of you that are in Ontario, for example, our Minister of Education, Paul Calandra, in order to stop having the issues with individual lesson plans where some of this nefarious behavior is taking place, where things are being snuck in and being used to indoctrinate our kids and students, his mandate is that he's going to be providing lesson plans across the board. All of this will be part of the school board official records that parents will have open access to. It should cut down, therefore, on disciplinary measures if everyone is following these. The directive will be made very clear. However, should they not be in Canada, these types of procedures are followed provincially. They are open to the public in K to 12 school board districts, and they have to comply not only with federal protections via the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but they also have to follow provincially the education statutes, which is the Education Act and regulations. And then you have school board policies and administrative procedures and codes, which everybody in their district should read through and get familiar with what that looks like so that you know how to start the process if you need to escalate anything via go check out the school board websites, review their handbooks, ask school leadership, and then access an FOI if needed.
And we can't stress enough that we're here to help you. We're asking you, yes, take these steps, but we're here to help you. And ultimately, the goal is that we also have parent groups and orgs on the local level that we will connect you with to ensure that, the help that you need is gotten. And that's a key driving factor of this End Hate in Education initiative.
When we're seeing that complaints are not being properly handled, there are two things that should be pointed out here. One is that oftentimes the cover-up is worse than the crime. That's what really gets you in trouble. Like Al Capone went to prison for tax fraud, not for being a gangster. What gets school districts in trouble is when they don't follow procedure, when they don't follow the right process, whether in adopting curriculums or whether in enforcing disciplinary rules. So this is why it's so key to find out what the process is and follow it, because even if you don't like what the school's response is, if they don't follow the proper procedure, that gets them into more trouble than merely saying that they will deal with it or doing something else. And the subsequent part of that, the next chapter, talks about how to make changes or to propose changes to disciplinary policies. And a lot of this, we see that schools are not well equipped with an understanding of what anti-Semitism is. Some schools may not actually even have anti-Semitism in their anti-discrimination policies, which is something that we all need to be proactive in. So if you're requesting your kids, your kids' school's disciplinary policies, and you're seeing that under discrimination rules, they don't have anything about anti-Semitism, that's something that you need to ask to have included. And that's not a big leap. I mean, it may require a formal process going through the school board, putting this on an agenda item, but things like having a definition of anti-Semitism, things like including, if you have DEI, I know that's problematic for many people, and quite frankly, in different states and at the federal system now, with the current administration, it's disfavored, but nevertheless, it still exists. Making sure that if other student groups have a representation in policies, so do Jewish students, that's something that you can push for affirmatively. That's where the activism comes in. And you find out what's going on there by looking at what these policies are.
Exactly.
And so in Canada, anti-discrimination and anti-Semitism policy frameworks are explicitly and broadly mandated at the provincial level. So these are all things that are accessible. This applies to schools, and they are bound by the Charter of Rights. So parents have a clear procedural route when it comes to needing to, again, to take action in this direction. If you are unsure about anything, it does go into further detail into the guidebook. please reach out to us. We are able to help. We've structured some different ways of doing the request forms, different letter templates that are in there at your disposal to work off of. But if you need an extra set of eyes, you need some help working on something, we can help you through this part of the process and help you to follow up.
Part of it is not just requesting policies, but when you think about it, how do lesson plans get used? How do curriculums come into force? How do policies come into force? It's your school board. And being aware of what's happening at the school board is crucial. Not only attending in-person meetings, but looking at the agendas, which are almost always nowadays published online in the United States and in most of Canada. School board meeting agendas are basically the roadmap of decision-making in public education. They outline the topics, the discussions, the actions for meetings where elected representatives decide on the policies, on the budgets, on the curriculum, and on staffing decisions even. So you know who is being hired into the school system. You can do your due diligence. You know what's being proposed in terms of curriculum. You can talk about that on the record at one of these school board meetings. And that's important. It's more important, I think, than a lot of people give credit to, because when you do have that critical number of people who show up and speak on a topic, they get the ear of the Board of Ed. We've seen this done successfully for our community in Ottawa. We've seen this done in Toronto. We've seen this done in the United States as well in many school districts. When parents show up in sufficient numbers and they're all pushing on aligned on an agenda item or a specific ask, whether it's a policy or a curriculum issue, their voices get heard. And Adar will be talking more about this as well, but really it's important to remember we're not alone. We're not talking just about Jewish issues. Yes, we may be asking about anti-Semitism, but at the end of the day, that requirement that schools protect our students, that's something that every other parent has the similar concern, and especially other minority groups, whether it's a Hindu or Sikh or Latino, South Asian, groups that have that history of persecution. LGBTQ groups as well. When you have students who are historically persecuted or historically treated as the other and have faced discrimination, we're in it together, because at the end of the day, the policies that protect one of us should protect all of us. So you build those alliances that Adar will talk about, but the starting point for that is look up the agenda at your school board, see what they're talking about. And when it's something that you know is going to affect anti-Semitism or you feel strongly about, go and speak or submit an agenda item if you think that that something is being ignored. Information on how to do all of this is in the Parent Handbook in a number of chapters for the US.
So in Canada, again, you have access to all the live stream meetings, the minutes of meeting, the subject. They generally will post the agenda of meetings 48 hours to 72 hours prior. In that, you can see if there's an availability for there to be public commentary. You can go to the submission to be present, to speak, and generally you have 3 minutes, so make them count. You're going to want to ensure that you're very thorough on what you want to speak to. Oftentimes you can find a window, even if it's not a direct subject that is very clear cut, but you might find something that you can grasp onto and be able to speak to it in the subject matter that is concerning in your child's school. Again, if you need help working on the 3 minutes that you want to be able to do a deputation in front of the committee, you have any of us to reach out to. We are happy to do that. There might be someone that we find out in the group later on who might be really great with editing and will volunteer to help with that. But this is really part of where the parent action comes into place to hold the school board meetings and what happens there, that they're accountable and that they're hearing your voice and what is concerning to you.
And not that it's time for questions and answers, but I did notice something that I think is relevant to bring up here. It's an issue that we see frequently in K-12 as we do on college campuses. It's when professors and teachers go on their personal social media or go out in the community and say the most heinous, hurtful, hateful, and discriminatory things, and we think that there is nothing that can be done about that. This is, again, an issue where you have to look at the policies. Some schools, not all, but a good number of schools, have policies that govern the conduct of students and even teachers off campus. For example, without getting too much into it because it's on an ongoing case, if you've heard about the incident in Skokie, Illinois, where the group of Jewish girls was accosted and assaulted by a group of older teens, more likely than not, the school should be imposing discipline based on the rules of that school district, even though this incident happened out of school. By extension, where you have rules and policies that address how teachers and students behave off campus, you can use those to your advantage to file those complaints. And where you don't have those policies, that's where you look up in the chapter on how to get something on the agenda item at a board meeting, and you raise this issue. You get other parents as well to say how important it is to have such a policy. Maybe with our help or someone else, another organization that we work with, draft a policy and submit it and get the board to adopt it with enough parents showing up to make this an issue. I think that some districts, of course, are more receptive than others, but this is a key example of the sort of thing that doesn't always get addressed by existing policy. Sometimes it does, and we can take advantage of it, but when it doesn't, you can use the guidebook to understand how to get that change in policy and implement it so that you do have that additional layer of protection or ability to complain through the system when you have that conduct outside of the classroom, whether it's by a teacher or by a student.
So now, Gerard, I'm
Just
thinking.
before,
Oh,
sorry,
go ahead.
Michelle, the one other thing that I will add is that we have in this the guidebook, and it's also key, and Adar will speak a little bit about this as well. Your kids can and should be involved. To the extent that you have a student, a kid who is willing to go to a board meeting and a school board meeting and speak, that's crucial because that actually is important in the sense that boards listen to students. When you have a student going to a school board during public comment and saying, this is what I experienced, this is what happened to me, I need your help, I need a change, or I need this policy to be enforced or written, that actually does make a difference. And that's one way that, and we address this in the guidebook, that students can be involved. Another is on campus itself with their peers. But we should not undervalue the impact that a strong student voice has in this entire process. Just like on college campuses, our kids are standing up for themselves. If you have a son or a daughter who wants to stand up and be vocal about issues affecting them, then by all means that should be encouraged. And when they're speaking at a school board, we should ask everyone we know to go and support them. There's that presence in numbers that's very meaningful. So not everything is about what the parents can do or the community can do. It's also about what teens can do.
Absolutely. Beautifully put, Gerard. And to emphasize what you were just saying, there's nothing more raw than student testimony. When it comes to the House Committee on Education and the workforce's infamous hearings that they've had regarding some of the Ivy League schools, it wasn't the parents that were standing up. It was the Jewish students themselves that were openly advocating for their civil rights. And the same could be done within the PTA level and within the school board level. So, as Gerard perfectly mentioned, you have to have students making public commentary within these within these school board meetings. It's going to be very, very hard for anyone from the PTA to ever dispute a student's own lived experience, as far as the discrimination they may have felt, or any assault or abuse, or any sort of thing that may serve as an assault on their respective civil rights. Now, we can also encourage students to mobilize through their own advisory councils. For the most part, they could assemble their own coalitions. They could get a group of friends together to provide accuracy as well as additional support from the impacted student or students' own experiences. Another thing students could do, they could circulate petitions around their school demanding respective policy changes. On top of that, we also encourage students to write op-eds, to write for their student newspapers, to write for their own local news outlets, to bring these stories to life. There is nothing more courageous and a way to meet the moment, even in the post 10-7 world, than having these students come forth and express their bravery. It is essential. These students have a legal right to be speaking. And when it comes to student engagement, from the public school level, it is vital that they bring in their non-Jewish friends. When it comes to parent teacher associations as well as school board meetings, a lot of the people that tend to go off the bat are non-Jews. When you go in, it's always important that you scope the scene, that you talk to the people around you, get to know them. Are they regular people that tend to come on a consistent basis? Is it a one and done person? Are they here to speak out about a recent incident? But the goal is to encourage consistency in activism. So when it comes to student engagement, it is key that they participate. We at the End Jew Hatred Movement have a teen ambassador program, and we have teens across the country that are making impactful changes, small and large. And it's vital that we have these students, these courageous students that are setting up clubs at their respective schools, where they could discuss these key issues. We have students that want to bring in speakers that are central or that promote the issue of civil rights. Sorry, I have not had enough water today. But it is vital that we have these students participating, because that is the ultimate demonstration of truth. It brings authenticity. And it's honestly the smartest way to truly meet the moment. When it comes to the city, or not just city councils, but like parent teachers associations and school board meetings, they'll simplify the process for the students to make it easier to understand. On top of that, we also encourage students to do as much as they can, hold public demonstrations. The most important thing that we have to advise our students, first and foremost, and this isn't even just students, but it's also for the parents too, it's a matter of conduct. We want to be the moral messengers. We want to come off as reasonable, concerned, not desperate, but committed and affirming that we want to see meaningful change take place in their respective school or respective school district. So conduct is everything. You always have to make sure your teens that are coming and participating aren't doing it for the memes. They're doing it for meaningful change. So it's all about healthy representation, positive imagery, making sure that these students are, speaking with clarity and with authenticity, knowing that they have a huge community around them that's going to support them in real time.
And thanks, Adar. And also, I want to bring up, you brought up individual districts. So which brings us to the point, in terms of the initiative, as we said, is nationwide and in Canada. But it's very important to note that we also have separate End Jew Hatred local chapters. So I don't know how many of you on this call are familiar with that concept, but because we do, I might actually drop the entire list of chapters with links shortly. And I think it's important to be in a chapter. Again, if you're in a city that you don't see a chapter, reach out to us and let us know. But the next step here will be on localized levels. We want to hold, you could call them mobilization meetings, but virtual meetings to discuss this K-12 mobilization, how we can help you. And within each of these chapters, many of them we have already identified, whether it's the grassroots or organizational leader in that area will be on that Zoom session with us, so that this is how everything makes sense. So we have the macro level of the whole K-12 initiative, but then on a micro level, localized chapter by chapter, we want to get down to the nitty gritty and really empower you all to make change with local leaders, parents or leaders helping you and holding your hand. So I'm going to drop, and it's just frankly important to be in our End Jew Hatred chapters if you're not already, because they're open discussion areas to really identify localized issues, as opposed to our action items groups where we send out actions constantly, and those are admin only. The chapter groups are open discussion. So I'm going to drop shortly a long list in here. See if there is a chapter in your area. Again, it's run on WhatsApp. And by all means join that. And that's where the next step here will also be taking place.
Absolutely.
So with that.
And if you don't see a chapter, If you don't see a city of yours that's listed, within the chapters that Michelle's going to provide, I'm also going to provide my own email. So that way everybody can reach out to me and I can help you set up your respective chapter. It's important that we assemble these chapters so that way we congregate and basically discuss in real time, whether it's in person or virtual, what we can do collectively as a movement, what we could do collectively as a community, how we can reach out to other organizations and our friends, of different faiths and cultures to help support our fight. Now, when it comes to the chapter structure, we hold them every single week. We, like I said, virtually or in person. We always encourage people to host, and we're happy to supply any materials needed, whether it's literature or any other legal resources you may need. So when it comes to when it comes to the chapter meetings, again, weekly, they last about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the amount of agenda items. We always want people to be bringing in agenda items, and that way we can digest each and every single issue, within your community. So that way we can determine whether there may be a legal fight to it or a grassroots fight to it, or even both. It is essential that we look into each community because you all know your communities best. I'm from Metro Detroit in Michigan. I may not necessarily know what's going on within the Jewish community in, I don't know, just an example, Houston, Texas. So if there's anybody here from Houston, Texas, I would need that point person to describe the community to me and the End Jew Hatred movement. So we're here as a resource. We want to have these meetings. We want to make them fun. We also want to make sure that these issues are taken care of delicately and with all seriousness. And we're here to help no matter how we can. Again, you're not alone. You have a massive mishpacha behind you.
Adar, that was incredibly well said and well spoken and very, very inspiring. And just to give you all a little bit of a behind the scenes, the whole reason why we launched the US and Canada so closely together was so that we can have transparency in the West. We know that what starts and happens as a test base in Canada often lands up showing its head when it reaches the US. And when we are all in it together and sharing information, something might be happening on one side of the country in the US, but it may have already been occurring in Toronto. We are able to connect each of those parents and they can explain to each other how they address something here. How did they bring up X, Y, and Z policy, and any arguments in which they've already written the framework. No point in reinventing the wheel. They can share those materials. We want to be able to share and make things easier. We know everybody has busy lives. The whole idea is that we are all in this together with full transparency. The US, Canada, and we just launched this, and we now have the UK is very interested, and we're building out their End Hate in Education guidebook. So this is catching. It's certainly proving to be helpful and very resourceful for people. And that's what we want. We want to make this easier and take away the stigma of seeing a little bit like a big climb, because what you don't know as a parent can sometimes be very intimidating. But this hopefully just makes it so much simpler for everyone.
And I wanted to apologize for anyone who's on tonight who thought maybe we were going to provide the keys to ending hatred in education. We can certainly help with steps, and we all have to work together. And it used to be that you could give your mazer, your 10% every year to a Jewish organization, and they could handle that pesky problem of Jew hatred in the classroom for you. But we are way past that. This is all hands on deck. As Michelle would say, it's go time. And we know that the antidote to despair is action. So each one of us, I'm a mom of 3 boys in Connecticut public school. Not only do I have to get actively engaged, but my 3 boys are in the End Jew Hatred Teens program with Adar. They're motivated, they're activated, they're assessing and identifying issues in the classroom on their own behalf, which is extraordinary. So it is a full family affair at this point. We would be happy to come to your town and bring this panel, this very panel, to your town, whether it's by Zoom or a fundraiser. We still do need to raise funds for these programs for what we want to bring on, and Michelle perhaps can share a little bit about that. But in terms of the Lawfare project piece, we're always here to help pro bono. The onus is on us, the Jewish community, not on the individual client. So we're really taking that on. A lot of these cases, these issues in public schools, and I'm sure Gerard will cover this case, but we not so long ago had a 17-year-old autistic nonverbal child who came home with a swastika carved in his back. We settled, and it was handled both legally and with our activist arm. So it's like a two-prong punch. And we are here always with the grassroots piece to handle activism, letters, motivation, rallies, and we'll walk you through all of it, but we want to work with you. So we're here, I'm here on the fundraising end. We could really use the help at all times. If you want to bring a panel to your neck of the woods, we're here. You can reach out to me. I'll pop my email in as well. Please don't forget to get your teens involved with the Adar's program. It's extraordinary. And really the point is that we all have to motivate and work together, because it is way past, we are outfunded and we are outmanned. So every drop in the bucket right now is critical.
And the ability to take the show on the road and do this in every state and help with guidance in every state and bring together the organizations that are working locally and at the state level everywhere, I think that is something crucial that we need funding for. And I'm going to use that as a segue, if my fellow panelists don't mind, into some of the Q&As. And I'll actually start with a question that's already been answered very well by Larkin, but about the curriculum records request in Massachusetts. And I bring that up because I want that to be an example of how to actually use the guidebook. So in Massachusetts, every school district has, I believe they're called records access officers. States call them different things. So you can, by law, request a copy of the curriculum for your district, for your school, from your town district's records access officer. However, there are two things that come to mind here, and this is why it's always useful to have these smaller conversations at the state level. In the state of Massachusetts, there is a framework for curriculum that's adopted at the state level, the Department of Education and Secondary Education, I want to say. Forgive me, it's been a long day and it's hard to remember all these things. They provide a framework for curriculum that schools are required to go with, but that does not mean that they provide a unitary curriculum that every school must use. So if you look at the state website, you will have an idea of what the curriculum framework is, what the state expects students to learn, but schools are still free to adopt their own curriculums that align with those state standards, which is why it's not enough just to go to the state website and see what's on there. You still need to go to your district's website or to go to the records access officer and request that school-specific, that class-specific curriculum, because they may not be the same level of detail at the state level that you will have with what's being put into practice at the school level. So this is an example of one specific issue in a state, but you can use the guidebook to help guide you through how to get these records. And then it would be great to be able to have these sorts of discussions on a state or local by local basis. Similarly, Larkin very correctly answered that when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's covered under existing anti-discrimination laws, like Title VI, like civil rights, different provisions of the Civil Rights Act. One thing I will add to that, though, is we are not, the Jewish identity is not just a religion. It's an ethno-religion. It's ethnicity, it's shared ancestry. It's also national origin, as it's understood in many cases. So when you're seeing a school that has Jewish identity only identified under religion, yes, you're still entitled to the same broader civil rights protections under the law. But that's an example of a situation where you want to approach the school district, and educate the school board on what Jewish identity actually is. Because if their policies are narrow, yes, you're still entitled to the broader legal protections, but the school's missing the point. And if the school's missing the point, if you do have incidents of anti-Semitism in the classroom, it's not likely that they will automatically know how to handle them, because they're not understanding what Jewish identity is. So that's an example of where you are protected by the law, but you want to be proactive and get that identity, assert your own identity, because the last thing we want is for CARE or Qatar or someone else to come in and define what Jewish identity is. So when you're not seeing anti-Semitism as part of an anti-discrimination policy, you want to be proactive and bring that up.
Yep.
Parents are not restricted to the districts in which they live. Anyone can request information and get it from pretty much anywhere in the United States. I think Canada, you do need to be Canadian or have a Canada-based address in order to request information under Freedom of Information laws. But in the US, anyone can request from anywhere. Realistically, you are more likely to get a quick and good, positive outcome if you are a member of the local community. A school will be more inclined to act when they know that this is a parent of a student in school. Second best is someone from the community. Yes, they'll answer a request from me, a lawyer in New York City, but they're putting me down on the list and they're going to be skeptical about what my intentions are. So they may be giving me a runaround that they're not going to give to a local community member. But yes, you can ask for records anywhere in the country. And really, my dream would be to be able to fund a project where we can bring all this together. I think we also have on our website, and this is very useful because we're crowdsourcing essentially curriculums and lesson plans. We have the ability for people to click and add links to their curriculum, to the lesson plans, to their specific school, so that any parent, anyone can access this database and see what's the curriculum or what's the lesson plan in my town. If someone has already found it, you're not reinventing the wheel. So this is, I think, something that we do differently, that we're offering this as a tool to essentially crowdsource information and give that access to anyone, because every organization should be able to look at this information and help them determine their policies or have ideas on how to address issues. But the best thing is to share this information widely with the community.
I think this is a huge point, Gerard. So I just want to emphasize how amazing this can be. If this is done correctly, we're trying to make it super, super easily here. And thank you, Larkin. You just brought up, just for an example, if you look at this, this is, again, we're just getting started, but you can see the school name, what it is when you click in, you see the actual handbook. I mean, this can be an unbelievable crowdsourced, just one-stop shop to really garner a cross section of what is going on nationwide and in Canada. So for instance, I'll even use myself, as Gerard mentioned before, so simple. All I did, I put in Google the name of my school district, social studies curriculum. And super, super simple. I mean, you can see actually it's at the bottom because I dropped it in here, district's curriculum instruction webpage. I believe this is it. I mean, I haven't tested it out, but it was just so easy to come up with. There it is. So I went into that. I wanted 10th grade because my daughter's in 10th grade. It took less than 3 minutes to get this. I dropped it in here. One is that then it will be crowdsourced for everybody to be able to just dip into and take a look at. But then, as Gerard mentioned earlier, the beauty here is that then we're going to work with other orgs to identify both keywords and, certain situations that within that lesson, within that curriculum, there might be something that we need to delve into further. But this one area can really just be huge. If even you right now, I see that we have a lot of attendees still on. If each of you go, whether you have, whatever grade your child might be in, and we start with social studies, and you just quickly follow this form and drop in the link to right here, the link to your child's curriculum, this is a huge beginning of something. So that's just one thing I think is really, really important to note. Just have info at our fingertips, and also info for then our partners in education to work with us on delving into even more. So, and because I'm always focused on action, I think that's a big action item, so to say, that I'm tasking with, everyone here with as a start, because we need to start somewhere in terms of really diving in. And this is a very easy start, just dipping your toe into sort of parent activism and really figuring out what next steps are.
Yeah, super easy to be able to do from home, right? You just sit there, kids go to bed, make yourself whatever you'd like,
Perfect.
tea, wine, I'm not
Yeah,
judging.
this is the
And like
epitome.
just do a search.
Yeah, it's the
Um,
epitome of armchair activism, but we need the armchair activists and also we
To
need
happen.
moms to, yes, we need action. And then we also need moms to host little parlors where they speak to other parents about what's going on in each other's schools and ways they can identify issues and work together. And also we need help fundraising, little cocktail parties where you can charge, a door fee and you can donate it to the Lawfare project so we can keep protecting you legally. Gerard, do you want to share a couple examples of cases that we took on recently in the K through 12 space?
Well, look, I think the biggest example is the one where in Las Vegas a student came back from school, autistic, nonverbal, with a swastika carved in his back. And the problem there is really that the school, again, it failed to follow its procedures. It failed to follow its obligations to keep that child safe. There were processes that were supposed to be followed within the school, which were not followed. So again, we're looking at figuring out what the rules are, what the policies are, and making sure that they're enforced. Because when they're not, then there's legal action to be had. In other schools, we have, I say both fortunately and unfortunately, because I am a litigator and I like suing the hell out of people. But we've had very successful outcomes in talking to schools where they understand that there are issues that they're not addressing in the right way. And these issues particularly come when discipline is not being imposed at all for conduct, not something where a student or a faculty member is saying something, but when they're engaging in conduct that is obstructing education, when they're obstructing the classroom. It's akin to the issue that we're having on college campuses and everywhere else, where you will see these arguments about speech, free speech, conduct, and what people are doing. And where we have had the most success and avoided, thankfully, in terms of getting a good outcome, litigation, is where schools understand that they are obligated to provide a safe space for students. And that when you do have the disruptions that lead to students hiding in a classroom or locking themselves into a classroom, or students can't actually get to class and be participating in it, then that is something that schools are failing to do, and they're adopting policies and starting to act better on it. But that's a handful of schools. Unfortunately, we see school districts that are beyond the pale in their failure to do things. And the other thing I will say is, bluntly, it's hard to file lawsuits for one main reason. You need someone to come in as a plaintiff. And it's not easy in K to 12 because it's much more difficult to have these organizational standings. You need someone who suffered a harm. And I can't speak as a parent, but I'm sure that all of you understand or feel the concern that, do you want your child involved in this? Is this a stigma that they will carry? Is this something that will impact them negatively as they're applying to college, as they're going out in the world? And unfortunately, I'd love to be able to say, no, don't worry about it, but we all do. So this is a very real impediment sometimes to filing lawsuits, because as bad as things get, there is that reluctance to come forward and be a plaintiff, even though people can make a big difference. And we do, to that, I also say that there are laws that provide for some level of anonymity when children are involved in lawsuits, and that is pretty key. So there are, don't avoid talking to a lawyer if you're experiencing anti-Semitism, because there may be ways that you can be helped short of, exposing anyone to risk or future career or school issues. But that is a very real concern that people have. And quite frankly, it is a constraint, and why we have seen more lawsuits about the policies not being enforced or procedures by Board of Ed not being enforced than actual Jew hatred that's directed at a student.
Thank you, Gerard. I see that there are some other questions in here. First, I just want to make sure that, and let you all know that the chapter links are in the general chat now to everyone. And also, I think it's important to note that we're on Facebook also, we have, it's Ends Jew Hatred Parent Edition. So that's specific to parents of K-12 college students. And these, they are doing, and when I say they, it's our team members that are just unbelievable researchers that are doing unbelievable work both identifying issues in elementary schools and middle schools and high schools nationwide and getting to work combating them. So for anyone on Facebook, that's also a discussion area. So that's very important for everybody to, be a part of. I do see one of the questions, which is great, asking how EJH can help get other non-Jewish communities to help us. This is the trillion-dollar question. That we've been working with, not even just on education, but in general, really working with the Hindu population, the Christian population, African American population. Not always easy, all of these, but we're really working our hardest to really join forces and combat the radical ideology that's seeping into our society. So we're trying both going the church route. We're trying, working with Hindu organizations. So we're getting there, but it's obviously, this allyship is something we thank daily our allies in all of our action chats, because God bless them all. We're really trying, but it's not something that's going to be, cracked easily. But we do think that the goal is really just fighting that radicalism together, because nobody wants radicalism to take over.
And Michelle, even with allies, the biggest thing that we can do to build those allyships is to be physically present at places where other people are, meaning school board meetings. Because where you will see who you will see at school board meetings are other parents, not necessarily Jewish parents, who are concerned about what's going on in school, and making those one-to-one connections, making those associations, talking to them, talking to other parents. That's the best way to build allyships, and that's something that I've seen done since time immemorial. From when your kids are little, you're talking to other parents in your community and neighborhood about play dates, about where the best parks are, where the best schools are, what the best thing to do is. That's how you develop those allyships, being there and talking to people at an
And Gerard,
institution.
I'm going to chime in, because this is along the lines. I would like you to answer this because you're brilliant and I think that you'll have an answer. Becky, what if you are an ally and identify as a Zionist and are targeted by staff and students for being a Zionist? How can an ally be protected for their beliefs? Can you shed, it's not an easy question, but can you shed some light on that question?
Yeah, it's a tough question, because in many ways, the Jewish community finds it easy to identify. Easy, that's the wrong word. Many of us find it easy to identify Zionism as a core component of Jewish identity. But the idea of Christian Zionist or allied Zionist is not something that is widely understood. But at the end of the day, if it is a component of someone's religious belief, the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish homeland, that association of that, the national self-determination of Jews in our homeland, that intrinsic connection, if that is a part of belief, then that is something that is arguable if you're experiencing that discrimination or attacks about Zionism. But here my suggestion is to associate it more with closely held religious beliefs than to allow it to be made into a political position, because you can agree, disagree, or discriminate even against people based on their politics, but not against their religion. So to the extent that I see this in the Christian evangelical community, I had the privilege of joining a church this past winter when they were addressing anti-Semitism in the Jewish community. A lot of them actually identified as Zionists because of their belief and their connection to them of Jewish identity and the land of Israel. So that is very easily for them to be argued as a religious belief and not just a political one. But regardless, I think the sense here is to make it about your belief and not about politics, if that helps answer at all.
No.
And
I just
sorry,
wanted to go
Alexandra, go on.
back to one thing that you were saying about for parents to go and meet other people at the board meetings. So not even just school board meetings, get involved with your parent council at your school. So board meetings will cover, the entire district that you're in, but to really get to know and build those relationships and cultivate more intimately, directly in your probably a 12-block radius for where your school is, go to those parent council meetings and engage and help one another to ensure that you're all working towards the same goal. Because I will tell you that There's a lot of people that are not happy with the radicalization and ideology that's happening in their schools. They want their kids to be there to learn. So this isn't just a Jewish problem. This is something that everybody's dealing with that doesn't align with that mandate. So I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, and we're always happy to help engage and put a Zoom together, even if you want, for your parent council. That's not a problem ever either. So you've got options.
I'd like to answer a question which I think most people will not like my answer, which is why I want to answer it. And this is Ken asking about that Muslim Student Association groups and the kafiyas and the Muslim Brotherhood and the hostage-taking videos. I think I know which school district you're talking about, and it's absolutely horrid. The problem with a lot of events like this is you do see the imposition of discipline when there is conduct. And here I think that you saw the conduct that was being punished were specifically those videos that simulated the hostage taking, which is understood to be inappropriate in an educational concept where parents and students are realistically concerned about school shootings. So you are going to see that punishment when you see depictions of kidnappings, even if it has nothing to do with Israel, with Jews, with Palestinians, with anything else. The problem there is the school did, to a large extent, follow its policy. The bigger problem, and this is the part of my answer that people don't like, is it's really difficult to cancel groups that are following, to some extent, the rules and even pushing them when we don't like what they're saying or what they're doing. The bigger issue is we need students to go out and do their own thing. So if what we're doing is we're complaining that some student club has some assholes who are coming in and doing assholey things, that's not going to get us very far unless we can show that it is actually discriminatory to students on campus, or they're actually violating a rule or a policy. And that's hard. You can push a school board to adopt policies. You can study the policies to see if anything fits that you can file a complaint about. But at the end of the day, we need our students and we need our allies to be doing their events. That's the answer people don't like, because that requires work and that requires the bravery to put yourself out there. But imagine if we had student groups like what Adar is talking about, EJH teens, that are bringing empowerment events to campus, whether it's a lawyer talking about the civil rights of the Jewish people, or a professor talking about the historical association and the civil rights movement between different minority groups and the Jewish people, or whether it's someone talking about the history of the Jewish people, including in Israel. We need to be more affirmative about our events, because if all we're trying to do is cancel someone else's, as offensive as they may be, so long as they play within the rules, and unless we change the rules to be more aggressive, which is admittedly hard to do in some circumstances, all we're left with is frustration that nothing is being done. And the hardest thing is to put yourself out there. The hardest thing is to say, okay, I'm going to start a student group at my school and I'm going to bring in good, positive, affirming events for Jewish students and for all students to understand Jewish culture. But that really is what needs to be done. That's why I'm part of the anti-hatred movement, because there are limits to what the law can do. So when you're violating rules, when you're violating policies, yes, that's actionable. We don't always like the consequences. We don't think they're enough. But unless we see something that's really pernicious and you can fit it within a policy, you also have to rely on activism, on affirming identity. And I know that's not a satisfactory answer to a lot of people, but unfortunately, that's how I see the limits of the law, that sometimes you need to go out and do that.
Right. Makes sense. I'm just looking a bit more.
I will add to that if these student groups are fomenting anti-Semitism, then it's really important to document what we actually see happening and how. We have to be able to describe what the anti-Semitism is. And that anti-Semitism can't just be they're wearing a Palestinian flag or they're wearing a keffiyeh. That's not seen as anti-Semitic. That's seen as a speech issue. And you can have sometimes hateful speech, but the speech alone, even on high school campuses, is often not enough to impose consequences unless it is somewhat disruptive. There have been plenty of court cases that make it difficult for schools even to remove or restrict what students are wearing, whether their t-shirts have political or religious messaging on them, unless they're disruptive. So that's really the goal here, is to show what the disruption is, to show the disruption to learning and safety. That's something to look into. But it's very difficult just to say there. You have to define what the anti-Semitism is. And the other thing to remember is being an anti-Semite, hating Jews, is not illegal. It's immoral, it's wrong, but you're allowed to be a racist. You just can't act on that racism. And that's a key distinction, because if what you're seeing is people exercising speech rights, and students do have speech rights, they may be limited in some forms, but they still have speech rights. If it's just speech, you're not going to be able to deal with it as well as you'd like to, unless there's also conduct associated with it.
All right.
There's a comment that I saw about IJV. And so I was part of a parent, because at the time my child was in the district, and I attended a rather large parent consult meeting where the report that was being put together, they checked the box for the Jewish organization as the IJV was who they consulted. That was the voice in the room. And so whenever there's something that's very big that is being implemented, or that a school board is trying to argue for, they are obligated to consult with the public. And it is very important to be able to articulate and to advocate that going to a fringe group that 0.3% of the Jewish population identifies with is not considered as consulting the Jewish community. There are groups where all of us live that have approved Jewish organizations that are supposed to be sought out for consultation when it comes to anything happening in K to 12. And if that is not happening in your area, please reach out to us. They are obligated to do so, because that is not representative of the Jewish community. IJV does not represent our voices, and that is something that we can absolutely help to address with you.
Thanks, Alex. So listen, everybody, first of all, thank you for taking almost an hour and a half of your time to join us and hear just one of the many things that Ends Jew Hatred has been working on. Those of you that are, an integral part of the movement, which is every single one of you by virtue of either being in our action items chat, on social media, coming out to rallies, in our individual chapters. I mean, so many of you are doing incredible work. The writers, the researchers, all these grassroots leaders, unbelievable work. So thank you all. And at this point, I think tonight we will also have a recording of this that will blast out in action items, and I'm sure do an email mailer with. But this is just the beginning in terms of this End Hate in Education initiative. We're all fired up, and I can tell all of you just by people that constantly text me regarding K-12 and what's going on in their own school and how they want to make a difference. Everyone knows that this is a huge problem, as Gerard said so perfectly at the beginning of this talk. Many times, we are fighting the fight on college campuses, and we have our fellowship program, etc. But many times, once you're already in college, after that indoctrination, it's a lost cause. So K-12 right now is a huge part of this fight. Let's do this, everyone. We're here to help, and we're here, most importantly, to make it clear that we are really a tent and umbrella for all of the great minds to work collectively, united, to help parents parents, be activists, be loud, get to those Board of Ed meetings, figure out what curriculum and what lesson plans are being taught to their children, and really dive in deep with the best minds, which so many of you bring to the table. And anything else anyone from our team wants to say? Oh, one more thing though. If anyone is having a problem accessing either clicking into the chapter chats or clicking into the action items chat and joining, or Facebook, I'm always available either, first at easy Michelle with 2 L's at endsjewhatred.com. Or if you are in one of our chats, then you have my phone number, and I'm available 24/7 essentially with, anything that you need to become a part of, let me know.
And we also hope that our K through 12 teens grow with us and continue their activism into our college fellowship program, which can be learned all about on our website. And we hope your kids join and get further involved. And a little shout out for 18 on 18, which is a fundraising campaign. Most of the funds raised will go towards our End Hate in Education. On the 18th of this month, you can do all your Hanukkah shopping. We have brands who are in solidarity with us, donating 18% of their proceeds from the whole day of the 18th, and that'll be on our End Jew Hatred Instagram channel. And thank you so much for your support.
And this initiative is a work in progress, so we are happy to make refinements and adjustments. If you have suggestions, please send them our way. If there are things we could be doing better or include more of the community, please let us know. At the end of the day, we're all in this together, as Michelle says, in much a different and much better way, but we're all in this together. We're all activists. We all are part of the effort to end Jew hatred and make our society a better place.
Thank you so much. Oh, one last thing. Partners in education, because we said that this is, as we said, this is all fluid. So our Partners in Education page, we're calling it Partners in Education page, but really what it means, everybody that wants to and can be partners, again, grassroots or orgs, please reach out to us. You'll see the Partners in Education page. We already have a bunch of great orgs involved, but let's really get that list bigger, from the big orgs to the tiny orgs. We want everybody on board to help parents help their kids. So that's just another piece. Larkin, you're amazing. On cue, she's bringing this up. So you can see these are already orgs that have, filled out the form and, to be a partner in education, and we've already spoken to, but there's many, many more. So please, all of you, get word out to any grassroots org you might know. Say, hey, this is the story, jump on as a partner, because really what EJH is trying to do is unite everybody. And now I think I'm done.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you all so much.
Good night.